High in the snowbound mountains, two wild dogs stumbled across a young boy, bound and left to freeze beneath the ancient pines. But instead of turning away, the dogs did something that astonished the world, and when their secret was discovered, every single witness was moved to tears. Before I show you what these two incredible dogs did next, can I ask you something small? If you believe no child should ever be left alone to suffer, and that animals like Ghost and Ember aren't just strays, but true heroes, please tap that subscribe button. Most people scroll past stories like this, but your one click could help this message reach someone who truly needs it. The Rocky Mountains had always looked peaceful from a distance, covered in soft white snow, standing tall like old guardians. They gave the illusion of calm, but anyone who truly lived there, who had felt the cold bite of its wind, who had stood alone under its towering pines, knew better. The mountains didn't forgive mistakes, and they certainly didn't play favorites. It was the middle of December when everything started. The morning was unusually quiet. No snow was falling, but everything was already coated in thick white. The forest looked like it had been frozen mid-breath. Icicles hung from branches like sharp glass teeth, and every footstep crunched loudly in the silence. Eli Carter, 12 years old and full of restless energy, pressed his nose against the frosted window of his family's wooden cabin. His breath fogged up the glass, and he rubbed it away with the sleeve of his sweater. Beyond the glass, the forest shimmered under the winter sun, and just beyond the clearing was a thin trail vanishing between the trees. He couldn't stop staring at it. He had seen a deer walk down that trail the day before, long legs stepping carefully in the snow. Something about it had stayed with him all night. The way the trees had seemed to part just enough for the animal, as if there was a hidden world waiting just past the bend. And Eli wanted to see it. His dad had left at dawn, crunching through the snow in his ranger's boots, rifle slung over his shoulder. The radio had crackled to life that morning with chatter about an avalanche warning and some hikers that hadn't returned home the night before. "You stay inside," his father had said sternly, pointing a finger as he stood by the front door. "Don't even open that door unless I'm home." Eli had nodded. He meant it too, but something about that trail, something about the silence, kept calling him. He sat on the edge of the couch for an hour, glancing at the clock every few minutes. The wind outside had died down. Sunlight filtered through the pine trees like golden strands. It didn't feel dangerous. It felt inviting. That's how the mountains trick you. Eli bundled up quickly, thick socks, snow boots, gloves, and his puffy red jacket. He left a note on the kitchen table, went outside to see deer trail. "Back soon, promise." He stuffed it under a salt shaker so it wouldn't blow away. Then he stepped outside. The cold hit him instantly. It wasn't brutal, at least, not yet, but it stung his nose and ears. Still, his curiosity burned hotter than the chill. Eli made his way across the backyard clearing. His boots crunched in the snow, leaving small prints behind. The trees looked taller up close. Quiet surrounded him like a thick blanket. The world felt still, like even the animals were holding their breath. He found the trail easily, just a narrow path in the snow, winding between the trees and heading deeper into the forest. He followed it with cautious steps, glancing back at the cabin every few minutes until the roof disappeared behind the trees. Then he was alone. The trail twisted gently, bordered by trees so tall they blocked the sky in some places. Sunlight glinted off frozen branches. Snowflakes hung in the air like tiny diamonds. Eli smiled to himself. He hadn't gone far. Maybe 15 minutes of walking. He could turn back any time. He felt brave. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that someone else was already out there, watching, not far ahead, just beyond a thicket of trees. A figure stood completely still, blended into the shadows, waiting. Eli paused once to look at a rabbit trail. He crouched down, brushing his glove across the tracks. When he looked up again, the forest suddenly felt different. He couldn't explain it, but the silence didn't feel calm anymore. It felt loud, pressing, heavy. He stood up slowly and looked around. Nothing, just trees, snow, more trees. He turned to head back. That's when he heard it, a branch snapping. The sound of that branch snapping echoed louder in Eli's ears than it should have. It wasn't close, maybe 20 or 30 feet behind him, but it was enough to stop him in his tracks. He turned quickly. His heart was already racing, but his brain tried to reason with him. It's probably a squirrel, maybe a deer. Animals move through the woods all the time. This wasn't unusual, but something in his gut twisted. The forest that had felt magical just minutes earlier now felt wrong, like it was holding something back. Watching, waiting, he stared into the trees, scanning every inch. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow, but all he saw was stillness. The snow on the ground remained untouched. The branches swayed gently in the breeze. There were no more sounds. Still, his legs moved faster now. He turned and started walking back toward the cabin. Only he couldn't remember exactly which way he had come. Everything looked the same. The trail he'd been following had faded. The snow had drifted slightly with the wind, blurring the footprints. Panic prickled in the back of his neck. He looked left, then right, then spun around in a slow circle. Every direction looked like the same endless maze of trees. Eli told himself to stay calm. He could just retrace his steps. He'd only gone maybe 15 minutes out. If he walked in a straight line, he'd hit the clearing soon. But as he started walking, he felt it again. That presence. Someone was there. Suddenly, a heavy hand grabbed him from behind. Eli barely had time to scream before something cold and rough was pressed over his mouth. He thrashed, kicked, but the grip was tight, too tight for someone his size to break free from. He was dragged backwards, his boots scraping through the snow, leaving uneven trails behind. His eyes were wide, his muffled screams desperate. He caught flashes of trees, sky, breath misting in front of his face. The person behind him didn't speak, didn't say a word. After what felt like forever, but was really less than a minute, they stopped. He was thrown to the ground hard. His shoulder hit first. The air whooshed out of his lungs. His gloves flew off. Before he could react, he felt rope tightening around his wrists. He screamed again, his voice finally free, but the forest swallowed the sound like it didn't even matter. Then it went silent again. The person was gone, just like that, and Eli was left alone. He lay there on his side, wrists bound tightly behind his back, breathing so fast he thought he might pass out. The snow stung his skin. His fingers burned from the cold, exposed and red. His chest heaved up and down. Where had they gone? Why did they just leave him? He tried to sit up, but the position of the rope made it nearly impossible. His legs worked, but his hands were useless. He rolled onto his back and stared up at the sky. Trees towering above him like giant guards. The light was starting to fade, and the cold, it was getting worse. Eli wasn't dressed for a night in the forest. His coat was warm, but not enough. His hat was gone. His boots were already damp from the snow, and his socks were soaked through. He screamed again, and again. Nothing. He cried, first out of fear, then pain, then pure frustration. And the worst part? No one even knew he was missing. His dad wouldn't be home for hours. There was no one else nearby. No hikers this far out. No cabins close enough to hear him. The wind picked up, whistling through the pine trees. The sky above turned a darker shade of gray. Eli's breath came in fast clouds. He pulled his knees to his chest, trying to curl into a ball, trying to stay warm. But the snow beneath him soaked into his pants. His body was losing heat faster than it could create it. He was shivering uncontrollably now. He bit his lip hard to keep his teeth from chattering. "Dad," he whispered, but no one answered. He was tucked at the base of a massive old pine tree, its roots exposed and frozen, its trunk wide enough to hide him from anyone passing nearby. Whoever left him there didn't want him found. He didn't know how long he lay there. Time didn't make sense anymore. He drifted in and out of sleep, jolting awake each time his body relaxed too much. Something inside him knew if he closed his eyes for too long, he wouldn't wake up again. The snow started falling again, soft at first, gentle flakes drifting onto his eyelashes, then heavier, faster. The forest was being buried again, and so was he. He could barely feel his fingers now. His toes had gone numb. He couldn't even cry anymore. And just when he thought he couldn't stay awake any longer, just when his body began to give up, he heard it, a rustle, not the wind, not a branch falling, something moving. The sound had come from behind the trees. Eli tried to lift his head, but it felt too heavy. His neck muscles refused to respond. His body had gone stiff from the cold, like the ice was seeping into his bones. He blinked slowly, trying to focus. Was someone coming? Was help finally here? He opened his mouth to call out, but no sound came. His lips were cracked and dry. His throat was raw from earlier screams that no one heard. The cold air burned with every breath. The rustle didn't return, only silence again, and snow. Thick flakes now, falling steadily, stacking like white bricks around his small, trembling body. Eli didn't know how long he'd been out here. It could have been an hour, could have been 5. Everything blurred together. His thoughts felt like they were floating just out of reach. And worst of all, he was starting to feel warm. That scared him. He had read somewhere, maybe in a science book at school, that right before hypothermia takes over completely, people feel warm, like their bodies trick them into thinking they're okay. Some even take off their clothes. He wasn't there yet, but he was close. He squeezed his eyes shut and tried to remember his dad's voice. Stay calm, Eli. If you're ever in trouble in the forest, stay calm first. Think. Don't panic. Panicking gets you dead. Eli tried to think. What could he do? Nothing. His hands were tied too tight. He couldn't feel his fingers anymore. His arms were cramping. His legs were stiff. The cold had crept up his spine, like a slow-moving snake. He couldn't move, could barely breathe. He started to cry again, silent tears that froze on his cheeks as soon as they fell. And with those tears came something else, a memory. He was 6 years old, sitting in the front seat of his dad's old pickup. It had been snowing then too, and they were stuck behind a fallen tree. His dad had gotten out with a chainsaw to clear it while Eli waited inside, scared, staring at the dark woods. He remembered his dad leaning into the window, grinning. Nothing in these woods that can scare me, buddy. I've seen it all. Back then, Eli believed him. Now, he wasn't so sure. The forest didn't feel like a place filled with adventure anymore. It didn't feel like magic. It felt like a trap, a cold, quiet place that swallowed people whole. Somewhere you could scream and no one would hear. Somewhere you could disappear forever and the trees wouldn't even blink. Another gust of wind blew through the clearing, sending a shiver across Eli's exposed neck. He coughed, hard. It hurt, sharp pain deep in his chest, like his lungs were trying to turn into ice too. He wanted to sleep, more than anything. Just let go. Just stop thinking. Stop hurting. But something wouldn't let him. A voice inside. His own voice, maybe. Dad's gonna come. Just hold on. But even as he thought it, doubt crept in. Would his dad even know to look? He hadn't left a note. No text. No call. He just walked out. What if hours passed before his dad came home and realized he was gone? What if no one ever found him? The thought crashed into him like an avalanche, heavier than the snow. He was going to die here, tied up like an animal, alone, cold, buried in the forest he used to love. He whimpered, not even strong enough to cry now. He thought of his mother, who had passed away when he was 8. He imagined her voice, soft and warm. She used to sing to him when he was sick, rub his back until he fell asleep. Would she be waiting for him? Would she be proud? He didn't want to go. Not like this. Not out here. Not alone. Another memory surfaced, this one strange. It was of a dog, not a real one, a stuffed animal he'd carried everywhere when he was little. Its name was Bandit, a floppy-eared brown dog with a torn paw and button eyes. He'd sleep with it every night, clinging to it when thunderstorms rolled over the mountains. Why was he thinking about Bandit now? It made him cry harder, not because of the toy, but because deep down, he wanted anyone, to sit beside him, to keep him company, to lie down next to him, and let him know he wasn't completely alone. That's all he wanted now. Not even rescue, just not to die alone. The trees creaked overhead. A bird cawed once in the distance, then silence again. No more rustling, no voices, no footsteps. He started slipping in and out again, dreams mixing with reality. He saw his dad's truck pull up. Then he saw his mom baking cookies in the kitchen. Then he saw himself running barefoot through a field in summer, chasing butterflies. He smiled faintly. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Maybe letting go wouldn't hurt. He stopped fighting the cold, let it wash over him like a blanket. His body relaxed, no longer stiff, no longer afraid. Until, crunch. He didn't imagine it this time. It wasn't in his head. Footsteps. Real. Close. Heavy. Not boots. Paws. The crunch of snow was slow, deliberate and close. Eli's eyes fluttered open, though it took everything he had just to lift his heavy lids. For a moment, everything looked blurry. White light bouncing off snow, shadows dancing across the ground. He thought it was another dream, another memory bleeding into the cold. But this time it was real. He blinked again. Something was moving through the trees. Not a man, not a rescuer, something else. Two shapes emerged from between the snow-draped pines, low to the ground, silent except for the soft thud of paws, packing fresh snow beneath them. Dogs. At first, Eli couldn't believe it. They didn't move like pets. Their fur was rough, wild. Their ribs showed beneath their coats. One had thick black fur, like midnight soot, and the other was golden red, with sharp eyes and a crooked tail. They were lean, alert, and watching him. Eli stared, too weak to move. The dog stopped just a few feet away. The black one stood slightly in front, his head low, ears alert. The red one circled slowly behind him, sniffing at the snow, then lifting her head to sniff the air. Their breath puffed in the freezing cold, visible like smoke in the winter light. Eli tried to speak, but all that came out was a cracked whisper. Help! The black dog stepped forward carefully, cautiously, his eyes locked on Eli's. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just stared. Eli was too weak to feel scared, He couldn't tell if the dog would bite or sniff or run, but something deep inside him said they weren't here to hurt him. The red dog followed close behind, and then, so gently it felt like a dream, the black dog leaned forward and sniffed the rope tied around Eli's wrists. Eli's breath caught in his throat. The dog let out a low whine, almost like a human sigh. Then he turned to the golden one and gave a short bark, a single sound, not loud, not panicked, more like a signal. Then something impossible happened. They sat down, not like wild animals waiting to pounce, like guardians. The red dog circled once, then curled beside Eli's chest, pressing her body against his side. Her fur was damp and coarse, but warm, surprisingly warm. He could feel her ribs moving, feel her breath, and then he felt something else, his own body warming. The black dog did the same, settling behind him, his larger body covering Eli's back like a second blanket. They lay like that, Eli in between them, for minutes, maybe longer. Eli's eyes filled with tears. He didn't know what this was. He didn't know who these dogs were. He didn't even know if they were real. But for the first time in hours, he didn't feel alone. The warmth seeped into his skin slowly. His legs still ached. His fingers were still numb. But the pain dulled just enough to make breathing easier, just enough to pull him back from the edge. He whispered again, this time more clearly, "Thank you." The dogs didn't move. The black dog, still alert, lifted his head slightly, his ears twitching. He was listening, not just to Eli, but to the forest. Then, without warning, the black dog stood up. Eli panicked. "Don't," he tried to say. "Please stay." But the dog didn't look at him. He sniffed the air again, took one step toward the trees, then another, and then he was gone. The red dog stayed. Her body was tense now, like she didn't want him to leave either. But she didn't move. She pressed harder against Eli's chest, her head resting lightly on his arm. Eli stared after the black dog. Where was he going? Why now? He didn't know it at the time, but that dog wasn't leaving him behind. He was going to find help, somehow, some way. He knew this child wouldn't survive the night, and somehow, some part of his instincts told him what he needed to do, that there were people out there, that there was still a chance. The red dog, still beside Eli, shifted slightly and let out a soft, low whine. Her eyes blinked slowly. She was staying. She wasn't going to let him die alone. The sky began to darken above the forest, painting the white snow in deep shades of blue and gray. Wind whispered again between the trees, tugging at branches, brushing snowflakes onto the small mound where Eli lay curled with the stray. But for now, he had warmth. For now, he had someone. And somewhere out there in the deep woods, the second dog was running faster than he ever had before, through snow, under branches, across frozen creeks. Every muscle in his body burned, but he didn't stop, because he knew, because somehow he understood what was at stake. The black dog, later named Ghost, ran like the mountain wind. Each leap forward sent snow flying in every direction. His paws pounded the forest floor in silence, weaving around trees and ducking under frozen branches like he'd done it 1,000 times before. But this time it was different. He wasn't running from hunger. He wasn't running from fear. He was running with a purpose. Behind him, the boy was still alive, but barely, and Ember, the reddish dog with the tired eyes, was still curled around him like a mother protecting her pup from a storm. But Ghost, he couldn't stay. Something deep in his chest told him if he didn't bring help soon, that boy would close his eyes and never open them again. Ghost didn't know how far he ran, but he knew exactly where he was going. Eli's father, Thomas Carter, returned to the cabin just as the sun dipped behind the mountain peaks. He noticed the silence first. Usually, Eli would be playing his old harmonica or tossing kindling into the fireplace. But now nothing, just a dim, too still quiet. Then he noticed the note on the table. Thomas read it once, then again. His heart sank. He dropped a bag of groceries and ran outside, yelling Eli's name into the cold wind. There was no answer. Snow had covered most of the footprints near the house. Panic settled in fast. Thomas rushed inside, grabbed his coat, loaded his radio, and called the local ranger station. "My boy's missing, in the woods. He went out earlier today alone." The next 2 hours passed in a blur. Search teams were dispatched. A helicopter was requested but delayed due to heavy snow in the upper ridges. Locals were called in to help comb the woods with flashlights and dogs. But none of them would find Eli, because Ghost was already ahead of them. In the small town of Redwood Hollow, nestled at the base of the mountains, people were used to seeing the strays. Most of them ignored them. A few tossed scraps. Others chased them away with sticks or shouts. But Mrs. Ruth Holloway, a retired teacher known for feeding crows and rescuing injured squirrels, had always had a soft spot for Ghost and Ember. That evening, as she walked back from the town bakery, bundled in a thick green coat and wool hat, she spotted something racing through the snow-covered street, like a shadow on fire. It was Ghost. His chest heaved. His black coat was slick with frost, his eyes wild but focused. He skidded to a stop in front of her and barked once. Loud, urgent. Ruth dropped her paper bag of bread. She'd never seen him like this. He wasn't begging. He wasn't scared. He was asking for help. "Something's wrong," she muttered. She bent down. "What is it, boy?" Ghost turned and ran a few feet, then stopped, turned back, barked again. It wasn't random. It was clear. He wanted her to follow. And so, without a second thought, she did. Ruth could barely keep up. Ghost didn't slow down much. Every few yards, he'd stop, glance back, wait just long enough for her to catch up, then keep moving. Her boots sank into the snow. Her breath came in short gasps, but she pressed on. She didn't know why. She just trusted him. Behind her, the sun disappeared completely. The trees got taller, closer, the air colder. Her flashlight began to flicker, but Ghost didn't need it. He led her through the woods like he had a map burned into his memory. And finally, after nearly an hour of climbing and stumbling, they reached the clearing. Ruth froze. There, beneath an ancient pine tree, she saw a boy. He was curled in the snow, ropes still wrapped around his wrists, his lips blue, his skin pale, and beside him, Ember, still wrapped around his chest, lifting her head just slightly at their arrival. Ruth dropped to her knees. Oh my God! She pulled off her coat and wrapped it around Eli. She pressed trembling fingers against his neck. A pulse, faint, but there. She grabbed her phone. No signal. She tried again. Nothing. Then she looked at Ghost. "You did this," she whispered. "You brought me here." He didn't respond, just sat there, watching the boy, waiting. It took another hour for rescue crews to reach them. Once the emergency call went through, Ruth's GPS location was shared. Helicopters were still grounded, but a snowmobile team was dispatched fast. When they arrived and saw the scene, an unconscious boy, half frozen, and 2 stray dogs protecting him, every single rescuer stood frozen in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like it," one medic would later say. They didn't just stay with him, they saved him. Eli was rushed to the nearest hospital. His temperature was dangerously low. He had early-stage frostbite in his fingers and toes, but the doctors were clear. Had he been out there one more hour, he wouldn't have made it. Ghost and Ember weren't taken by animal control that night. They rode in the back of the truck, right beside Eli's stretcher. No one questioned it. When Eli finally opened his eyes in the hospital room, the first words out of his cracked lips were, "Where are the dogs?" His father was there, holding his hand, barely able to speak through tears. "They're okay," he whispered. "They're right here." And sure enough, just outside the door of Eli's hospital room, 2 sets of eyes waited patiently. Ghost and Ember. Word spread like wildfire. By morning, the local news had already picked up the story. 2 stray dogs saved missing boy in the mountains. People couldn't believe it. Locals who once ignored or feared the dogs now cried at the sight of them. Donations poured into the shelter. Artists painted murals. A local author announced a children's book based on their story. And Ruth, she spoke at the town hall, her voice trembling. "These weren't just stray dogs," she said. "They were angels, covered in fur." Thomas Carter refused to let the dogs go back to the wild. He built them a kennel next to the cabin, but truthfully, it stayed empty most nights, because both Ghost and Ember preferred sleeping right next to Eli's bed. They weren't wild anymore. They were home. They were family. And even now, years later, whenever Eli walks past that old pine tree where he nearly died, he stops, he touches the bark, and he remembers how 2 forgotten creatures of the woods gave everything to save a little boy they didn't even know. The morning after Eli was rescued, the town of Redwood Hollow woke up different. The snow still covered the streets. The trees still groaned in the wind, but something had shifted, something in the air, in people's hearts. It was like the whole town had taken a deep breath, and now they were finally exhaling, because everyone had heard, everyone knew, the story of the boy, the freezing night, and the 2 stray dogs who had done what no person had. Eli sat propped up in his hospital bed, his cheeks still pale, but his spirit slowly returning. His fingers were bandaged, his lips still cracked, but his eyes sparkled every time the door creaked open, because waiting outside, like clockwork, were Ghost and Ember. They refused to leave the hospital. Staff had tried to move them once, but the black dog had growled low and firm, not with aggression, but with purpose, with protection. and so the hospital made an exception. The 2 dogs were allowed to stay. Nurses brought them water. The janitor brought scraps. The receptionist started calling them the silent heroes. Eli would stroke Ember's head when she climbed up beside him, her weight careful and slow. She never took her eyes off his face, never moved unless he did. "They didn't just save my life," Eli whispered to a nurse one evening. "They stayed with me when I thought I was going to die. They didn't let me be alone." The nurse turned away, so he wouldn't see her wipe her eyes. By day 2, local reporters camped outside the hospital. By day 3, it had gone national. TV crews came from Denver, then New York, then London. People everywhere were captivated by the story. 2 dogs, written off as strays, surviving brutal winters alone, only to end up saving a human life. Interviewers begged for a chance to speak with Eli. His father kept most of them away. But when one journalist gently asked if Eli wanted to share a message, the boy nodded. He looked straight into the camera and said quietly, "Don't ever ignore animals. Don't ever call them worthless. They knew I was dying, and they didn't walk away. They didn't even know me, but they stayed." That clip went viral. Millions of people watched it. Millions cried. People who had once chased dogs away from their porches now left food out at night. Animal shelters reported a surge in adoptions across 3 states. A petition was started to recognize Ghost and Ember with an official award. It gathered 250,000 signatures in 24 hours. A month later, still healing but stronger, Eli stood on a stage in the town square. His red jacket had been replaced by a new one, donated by a supporter from Oregon. His hands still bore small scars, but he held the leash of each dog proudly. Ghost stood tall, head held high. Ember leaned slightly against Eli's leg. The mayor stepped forward with a small black box. Inside, 2 engraved medallions. One red, for loyalty and courage, Ghost. The other, for protection and heart, Ember. They were the first animals in state history to receive the Medal of Animal Bravery. The crowd applauded. Many wiped their eyes. And Eli, standing at the center of it all, looked down at the dogs and smiled. "I didn't save them," he said to the crowd. "They saved me." In the weeks that followed, the sheriff's department launched a quiet investigation into the boy's abduction. They traced the footprints, examined fibers from Eli's jacket, interviewed hikers and locals. Eventually, a suspect was identified, a man with a history of mental illness, known for living off-grid in the forests. He was found hiding in an abandoned hunting shack, wearing a coat that had once belonged to Eli. He was arrested without incident. But what stood out most wasn't the capture, it was the timing. Had Ghost and Ember not acted when they did, Eli would have been lost forever. The trail would have gone cold. There would have been no clues, no evidence, nothing left to find. The dogs didn't just save Eli's life. They helped catch the man who tried to take it. Back at the cabin, the kennel Thomas Carter had built stayed mostly untouched. Ghost preferred the porch, lying by the door like a silent sentinel. Ember slept curled up at the foot of Eli's bed, and the bond between boy and dogs? Unbreakable. Eli began taking them on walks daily, sometimes deep into the woods, but never alone, never again. His father would join, sometimes neighbors, other times strangers who had read the story and just wanted to meet the dogs who did the impossible. One afternoon, Eli asked his dad something. "Do you think they knew?" "Knew what?" Thomas asked. "That I was worth saving." Thomas knelt beside him, resting a hand on Ghost's back. "I don't think they thought about it," he said. "I think they just felt it, like it was part of them, like they were meant to be there." A few months later, a package arrived at the cabin. No return address, just a note for the dogs who reminded us what love looks like when we need it most. Inside the box, 2 handcrafted leather collars, each stitched with gold thread. Ghosts had a tag that read, "Protector." Ember's read, "Guardian." Eli cried when he held them. The collars were placed gently around their necks. From that day on, whenever someone came to visit, they'd bend down, read the tags, and whisper, "You really are." The snow eventually melted in Redwood Hollow. Spring crept in slowly, softening the frozen ground and coaxing wildflowers from the earth. Birds returned to the skies, streams began to flow again, and life, in its quiet, stubborn way, moved forward. But some things had changed forever. People didn't look at stray dogs the same way anymore. Where once there was suspicion or fear, now there was compassion. Kids in town would point and whisper excitedly when they saw Ghost or Ember walking with Eli. Shop owners left bowls of water and treats outside their doors. The local school even dedicated a day to teaching students about animal loyalty, using Eli's story as a lesson. But to Eli, they weren't legends. They weren't heroes on a stage. They were his family, his miracle. In the months that followed, Eli recovered more than just his strength. He found something most kids his age never do, a deep, almost sacred understanding of what it means to be protected by a love that expects nothing in return. He and his father would sit on the porch most evenings, watching the sunset spill gold over the treetops, and Ghost would lie at their feet, eyes half closed, ears always listening. Ember, she liked to rest with her head on Eli's lap, her tail gently thumping whenever he stroked her back. They never left his side, not in town, not at home, not even when he had nightmares, because on those nights, Eli would wake with a jolt, heart racing, and find two pairs of eyes already watching him, calm, present, steady. They never let him fall back into fear. They were more than dogs. They were his proof that even in the darkest, coldest, most hopeless places, love can find you. That help can come when you least expect it. That the ones the world forgets are sometimes the ones it needs most. Years from now, when Eli tells the story again, maybe to his own children, or to a classroom of wide-eyed kids who ask, "Is it really true?" he won't say much. He'll just smile and point to the black and white photo hanging on the wall, the one with him, 12 years old, in a hospital bed, flanked by two muddy, wild-looking dogs, one with amber eyes, one with a crooked tail, and beneath the photo, a tiny brass plaque that reads, "They didn't run away, they ran to me." Subscribe for more true stories that will move your heart.